I hope you all are ready to go. Just to introduce the two of us that we have on the line. My name is Courtney. I am the Girls at Scuba Book Club admin. I'm also the Girls at Scuba moderator. So for the large 45, almost 45,000 members we have on Facebook, I help moderate those posts. I help look at everything that's coming in and accept your friends that come to visit us and whatever else. But we are so excited to have Jill on for our Into the Planet book club, a virtual one. And this is perfect because most people have to do things virtually anyway. So this is so wonderful. And thank you so much, Jill, for coming on and speaking with us
Yeah,
today.
my pleasure. My pleasure.
So just to kind of give an overview of who Jill is, she is a world-renowned cave diver. She was in the inaugural Women's Diving Hall of Fame. She's done countless trips all over the world, most of them being all over in different caves. You've dove all sorts of amazing things. So we're so excited and so honored to have you because you are definitely a role model in all of our groups. So thank you so much for spending your time and joining with us.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely my pleasure.
So let's kick it off. Let's see what we have. Okay, so let's start off with an easy question. So what would you say is your favorite sea creature, flora or fauna?
Favorite sea creature? Probably humpback whales. I mean, I think they're absolutely amazing. And I had an incredible experience swimming with about 100 humpback whales off Newfoundland. It was just a mind-blowing experience, and I'll never forget it.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, that sounds awesome. I've definitely seen some humpback whales, but I'm sure just being in the water with them and feeling the vibrations that they emit was just incredible.
Oh, they're so powerful. This mother and this calf just kept coming by me really close. About 5 times they passed by, and every time she would kind of roll on her belly and show me her side. And like the 5th time she came by, she was so close that my dive buddy kind of reached up and did like a high five with the pectoral fin. And then a big bull came swimming by, and his tail fluke just came whoosh, like right in front of my camera dome, and it was so powerful that it just kind of blew me backward in the water. And a few seconds later, he let out this massive, like 2-ton crap. And I was swimming in humpback shit. But it was amazing. It was amazing.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's like when I was in Mexico last year swimming with the whale sharks. You know, you're swimming and they're eating all this stuff, and you're literally then you get out of the water and you're covered in like tuna eggs, and you're like, whatever. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah. I was thinking, well, if I have fish babies, I'll know why I had fish babies, because I was literally like swimming with all these tuna eggs. But yeah, it's incredible to like just be in that space with them. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
all right, let's see. Where should I start? I literally have like three pages of questions. So I guess let's see. Um, I guess the biggest question that I think I want to ask first is, what was your favorite adventure to write about for in Interland? Because you had so many like pieces and they were beautiful.
Yeah. The favorite thing that I did write about or didn't write about it?
Oh, that's a great question. I guess we'll start with what you did write about first and foremost.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole cave diving inside the B-15 iceberg down in Antarctica was, huge in my life. It was an amazing experience. Even just to travel to that remote corner of Antarctica was amazing. But being inside that iceberg was so powerful, and more like going to another planet, just a
Yeah.
dive site. Really, it was incredible. And of the things that hit the cutting room floor, I guess there's so many. I think cave diving inside the Monte volcano in Lanzarote. I didn't really get to cover that in the book, other than maybe a sentence to say that I was there. But it was amazing. That to enter that cave, you can either enter through these like holes in the side of the mountain itself, that lead down into lava tubes that then you go dry caving for a while, and then you get to a point where you have to go diving to continue any further. But you surface like many times in it's like it's a sump experience where you're going underwater and then surfacing, going underwater and surfacing. But the last sump, where you go underwater and stay underwater, you're literally going underneath the seafloor. So the imagine like the lava spilling down the side of the mountain, and then it hits the water, creates this huge gas explosion, but the lava keeps flowing into the ocean, and the outer core of that lava, or the outer sort of sheath of that lava flow, will solidify first, and then the lava inside keeps flowing, which means it creates this long tube that goes down under the water. And then over time, since this eruption took place about 5,000 years ago, the seafloor keeps piling up on top of the tube. So now you are like cave diving underneath the seafloor. And inside that lava tube, like long way in, you get to this place where there's a tiny hole in the ceiling, and one grain of sand at a time drops from the ceiling to the floor, and it creates this pile of sand that's kind of like the bottom of a sand egg timer, you know?
Yeah.
So you've got this enormous pile of brilliant white sand that's come through this hole from the seafloor above you, and the sand mountain is 80 feet tall.
Wow.
So just seeing that inside this dark, otherwise, like dark lava tube, it's just like, what is that I'm swimming up to? What is that? It's a sand mountain. It's crazy.
Oh my gosh, that sounds incredible.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing. Let's see, what was some of the, trying to read through. Oh, one question. This is actually a great question that one of the ladies asked was, I've read your family and partner are often worried when you're diving. How do you yourself cope with that while you're diving? Are you aware of it during your dive?
Yeah.
Do you have any rituals you fulfill?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm very aware that risk is not just something that's personal. Like so often you hear those words together, personal risk. It's like, no,
Yeah.
no, no. When you dive, your risk is more than something that you're just doing for yourself. When something happens to a diver underwater, then the risk that they took spills messily onto, their potential rescuers or recovery divers or the community, their family, to, the fact that a site or a boat, might go out of business or be closed or whatever. So a risk is not something you take for yourself. It's something that encompasses so many other people. So every time I go diving, I have to think about my husband and how this affects him, because he's always the one at home waiting for his wife that does this dangerous job. And there are lots of people that do dangerous jobs, firefighters, or these days anyone in the healthcare sector, or anywhere in the, in the service sector, whether you're a delivery person or a grocery person, like you have a dangerous job and there's someone waiting for you at home. And so you have to consider those other people every time you go diving. And so I do that as part of my rituals before diving. And when I met my husband, I was already a very well established, technical exploration diver. This was my career. So he kind of married into that mess. But it doesn't mean that it's been easy. Although he acknowledged marrying into that risk, there are times when the PTSD got too big for both of us. And he begged me to take a break, just to give him some headspace to process it all. But I hit the jackpot finding my Robert, because he respects and understands that what I do is what makes me who he fell in love with. And so that's how he manages to justify the risks that I take. Doesn't make it easy, but it helps him to justify it.
Yeah. I think that was something that I actually thought about a lot when I was reading your book, that very much struck me personally, was like the thought of you were talking let's see, I have all these notes and I'm like trying to figure out where they are. It was basically about the idea of like, I love that how Wes was teaching you or helped you figure out about how you had to let go of societal expectations, and to stop
Hmm.
focusing on changing yourself too much to make Paul happy.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that as women, it's really tough for us to learn this lesson,
Oh, it
and
is.
I'm sure it must be even more so in relation to
Hmm.
being in the public and science world. So can you talk a little bit
Hmm.
about that, like in terms of being okay with these societal expectations, especially in
Hmm.
the forefront of either the public eye or just the science world
Hmm.
in general? You know, the science
Sure.
world in general is very male dominated too.
Yeah. I mean, just for the, full disclosure and information, I'm 55 years old now. So I would say that I've grown in that process throughout my lifetime. It was much harder when I was younger. And I think it's harder maybe for people that grew up always having social media in their lives, right? I know when I talk to kids, they're really concerned about what other people think about them.
Yes.
Where for me growing up, I was certainly concerned what other people thought, whether my teachers, my family, whatever else. And I was definitely concerned with fulfilling expectations that others cast upon me. I mean, I remember when I was 30, turning 30, my father wrote me a letter, and it was basically, "Dear, your biological clock is ticking, hurry up and go marry someone and have a family. Like, you need to do this now. It's important." And I'm thinking, really? Do I have to? Like, I don't know if that fits for me. Um, and, my first career in life in some ways fulfilled those family, societal, culture expectations, but very quickly I learned that I couldn't do that and be fully myself. And in my first marriage, I remember saying to myself, "Oh my God, if I don't get out of this now, I won't know who I am
Yeah.
anymore." And so there are many times in life that I've sort of reset and started over and decided that I needed to find a path that was really, really right for me. And although, I make less money now than I did when I was like 21, I am 100 times happier and
Yeah.
more productive and doing more for society than I was back then. And all that stuff about worrying about what my family thought or my parents thought or whatever else, that all comes around. But ultimately, we only have one life to live. And if you find something that gives you passion that you're truly happy about, then it doesn't feel like work and you don't worry so much about what other people think.
Yeah. No,
But it's
that's
not easy. I mean, it's not
yeah.
easy.
Most definitely not easy, and
Mm,
especially I think, and I don't want to bring too much of this
mm.
virus and pandemic into this because we're trying to escape that right now. But it's funny when I was reading some of the book too, because I was reading it, as this was starting to build some more
Yeah.
too, and it was very interesting how things that might seem essential really aren't essential anymore. But
Mhm.
also the idea of like passion versus that
Yeah.
fulfillment of work too. It's been interesting in my mind thinking about that too.
Well, I think a lot of people in these days maybe rethinking about what serves them. Like suddenly in the course of 2 weeks, everybody's been thrown into this expedition unwillingly,
That's
right?
a great way to say expedition.
Yeah, well, it kind of is, it's like this new isolation. Uh, but divers are problem solvers. We're seekers, we're curious. Those are all good things that are going to serve us well in this expedition. But I think we're also all rethinking what's important
Hmm.
in my life and what will matter when this is all over. What's going to be the most important thing to me? There'll be a lot of things that seem pretty trivial in life. Like even when you turn on the TV these days, some of these things that people have been like binge feeding on for a decade are kind of like, oh, this is just so trivial. I can't get into this. It's too,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But it's an interesting time. I mean, it's a challenging time, and the book I really wanted to write about not just expedition stuff and cave diving and all these remote and interesting places that would turn on divers, but I wanted to talk really personally about fear and facing fear and challenge and change, and that feels kind of prescient right now. Yeah.
Yeah. I felt that a lot too of what you were saying of your confession of vulnerability regarding like the bends and
Mm-hmm.
how once you mentioned it, then others came forward. And but
Mm-hmm.
why do you think that there is such a stigma to be bent?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when I first learned about decompression illness as a young diver, then we categorized it into deserved and undeserved, right?
Mm,
And what a crazy lingo for something that's like an affliction, you know, an accident. Like, would you ever say that someone deserved or didn't deserve a car accident, even if they
yeah,
were, you know, you don't call drunk drivers like deserved accidents, right? Like
right.
it's crazy. You know, you don't call people who have cancer as deserved or undeserved, depending on, you know, what type of cancer they've had. Um, and so there was a lot of stigma with that. Everybody thought that when you got bent, you made a mistake. And we
Mhm.
know that's just not true. We know now that it's a sports injury. And, you know, even if we just look at one situation of PFOs, patent foramen ovalis, which is an opening in between the left and right sides of your heart
Mhm.
that is present in vitro when you're in mom's womb, and
Mhm.
it should close when you're born or soon after. But for 1 out of 3 people, it doesn't fully close, and that opening allows gas bubbles, micro bubbles, to pass from one side of the heart to the other, bypassing the filtration of the lungs. Therefore, 1 out of 3 people are far more vulnerable than others to getting bent, and they don't have to have done anything wrong.
Yeah,
You know, they could sneeze after the dive or do a deep knee bend to pick up a tank, and that increase in pressure can squirt those bubbles from one side to another and end up, you know, in someone's spinal cord, causing a hit. That's not deserved. So no hit is ever deserved, and it's unfortunate that even today we still have some stigma over people getting bent. So yeah, when I first told my story that happened almost 20 years ago, people wrote me and said, "Are you nuts? Are you nuts sharing that story? You know, like you'll never get another student again if they know you've been bent, or they'll think that you're some kind of an idiot." And I thought, wow, that's crazy. That's
yeah,
crazy. And once I shared my story, I discovered hundreds of other people and friends that I knew but did not know had been bent. Yeah.
right. Yeah, I know. I have thankfully not been bent, but there could
Mhm.
be a situation that I have been in. And I know that women
Mhm.
have shared their stories on Girls at Scuba about being bent, and just it's been
Yeah.
very interesting just watching how things happen. And
Yeah.
again, I agree with the stigma. The stigma is there is a
Yeah.
stigma there, and I agree with you that there shouldn't be a thing as deserved and undeserved because no matter
Right,
what.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, I just wrote a huge feature for a cover feature for Diver magazine. It's North American magazine called Diver. They actually offered the issue for free downloads, so you can just go to divermag.com, or just, you know, Google it and you'll be able to download the issue. But I did a major feature on the DCS hits that haven't ended up in the Dan accident
Hmm.
database. So just a sort of a frank look at how many people are getting bent, how many times they're getting bent, whether
Yeah.
they're getting treatment, and what some of their personal experiences were. And I interviewed different people online for a year for the article. So yeah, go ahead and download that and
Yeah.
check it out.
Yeah, we'll definitely look it up. And I know that one of the moderators works for Dan, so
Mhm.
we'll post that in the not the show
Yeah,
notes, but our show notes.
yeah, Diver. I'll type it in there. Diver magazine. Oops. Cool. I think it's divermag.com. Try that. Hopefully I got that right.
We'll check it out. Don't worry.
Yeah. Hmm.
Let's see. One lady asked a great question. What's your favorite configuration to dive with at this moment?
Mm. I waffle in between side mount and rebreather, and I have a side mount harness on my rebreather. So whether I'm wearing one or the other, everything's in the same place, and I can get to stuff in the same way. And so it depends. Each of those is a different tool for me. and I'll use whatever's the most appropriate. I still do some single tank diving too, and you'll happily see me free diving as well. I'll do anything to get in the water and be in the water.
Yeah.
But yeah, for most of my dives, it's either side mount or these days a prism rebreather is the one I'm using right now.
Very cool. I have not tried out rebreathers, but they have been very interesting to me. But obviously, there's a lot of different risk factors, like we were kind of talking about with those
Sure.
two. I mean, there's risk factors with anything, but
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
for definitely rebreathers, that's something you have to be very cognizant about for that.
Definitely. Hey, I see someone said, you mentioned your age. Have you changed how you dive or any of your pre-dive rituals as you get older? I'm older and wiser. I'm definitely, I'm not as urgent to do a particular dive, and in the sense that I've grown in my maturity. I can go to the end of the earth and spend like $100,000 on a film project, and then have a particular failure that occurs on the boat on the dive of a lifetime, and then not do the dive. Like, that's easy for me now, to just say, oh no, everything's not right. Sorry, guys. So I'm definitely more mature, and it's much easier for me to just sit a dive out. I'm really, really, really stringent with safety protocols. And I think I've always been very safety conscious, but I think I've gotten better and better about being unwavering in those protocols. I think in my wisdom, I'm a little more likely to speak out too when I see something happening. Like, I used to sort of look at someone else's gear and go, oh man, that's a mess. But I don't really feel like I should say anything because she or he is not my student or whatever. It's none of my business. Well, if they're in the water with me, it's my business. And I'll just try and do it in a non-threatening, helpful way, to ensure everybody's safety. So I'm much more likely to enforce the social safety contract amongst everyone I'm with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's important. I mean, yes, this is a sport that you dive with a buddy, but also looking at for yourself. It's a very kind of, interesting street to be on. You're kind of like on a one-way street, but also on a two-way street at the same time, of making sure that everyone's safe, but also at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I always like say to people, like, if I'm the expedition leader or the charter leader, whatever else, I'm like, listen, please, if you see something wrong with my stuff or me, please speak up. I don't want to be immune from those conversations either. Like, I want everybody to be 100% comfortable for a dive. Yeah.
That's important. That's important that you still learn as you grow, because that you could have dove thousands of times, but then there's this one time when it's like, oh, that was a weird.
We all make mistakes. Like, I'll still make mistakes 8,000 dives later, So I really appreciate it when someone points something out.
It's actually interesting that you were talking about like making mistakes, because one of my favorite quotes was that I personally felt similar to, was about dreamers. And you talked at first before about failure and rejection, and how that why do we, or how do we look at rejection and failure in a positive light instead of a negative light? Because so many people look at rejection and failure as negative.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think there is such a thing as failure. I call it discovery learning.
That's what you said.
Because we can all look back on our lives and we can say, oh my God, why did I date that guy? or why did I do that? What was I thinking at the office? You can't change any of that. You can't change any of the terrifying, frightening, horrible, good, bad, or ugly things that happen in life. What you can change is what you do with those experiences. So those all inform you how to move forward in a better way in life. And there's no sense beating yourself up over the past that you can't change. Just decide what you're going to do with those experiences and make it positive. And that's what discovery learning really is. And when you do that, you can let yourself off the hook for so much that you felt guilt over. And you can also find peace and forgiveness in that, if you don't have those regrets anymore.
Yeah. And to go with that too, and I love that you say that, like, that you have peace with that, sort of like you can forgive yourself for that, because I think a lot of, especially females, hold that rejection or hold those spaces because we just have been conditioned that it's our fault, it's our issues, that that's why we can't make mistakes, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I admit it's still a learning experience.
Oh, totally.
Sometimes I have to read my own little quotes back to myself. Like, these days when things seem so overwhelming, we don't know what's happening. There's so much uncertainty in the
Yeah.
world. You watch the news and you can just become in a total funk in the course of about 3 minutes. And then I just, go back to something I wrote in the book, which is, you can't necessarily visualize that big success or that solution to that enormous problem, but you always know what the next best step forward is. So just do
Right.
that and then celebrate that little success. If that's just turn off the news or get up, have a shower, brush your hair, get out of the PJs you've been in for 3 days.
Yeah.
Whatever you need to do, then celebrate that success. Although I'll admit here, I'm wearing my flannel PJs.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Um, and one person actually asked, which kind of goes along with this discovery learning too, and kind of goes along with you talking about your age as well, that like, how do you think you've changed your dive or your pre-dive rituals as you've gotten older?
I think I've just gotten better and more honest with it, more regimental about my own safety protocols. And there's also big expeditions that I've said no to, and it's easier for me to say no to if it's just not exactly right. Like I'm much more aware of my the preciousness and the shortness of life, and so I'm much more, honest about the risk and really careful about what I choose to take on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that,
Mm.
like, we don't always have to say yes to everything.
Mhm.
We can really choose that, no,
Mhm.
that's not really feeling in my body, right? Or my mind or wherever else it might be too.
It's interesting too when you verbalize that, because sometimes when you verbalize that, someone else on the boat will say, "Oh my God, I wasn't really feeling right about this either. Could we just do like a shallower dive? Would anyone mind if we just moved over and did this instead?"
Right.
Yeah, it's when you're willing to verbalize it, you'll usually find people that feel the same way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do agree with that,
Yeah.
that you're not alone in this situation. A lot of people, there might be people that are feeling the exact same way you are
Mhm.
too.
Mhm. Oh, I see a light question there. Someone says, "What's your post-dive snap?" Your
I saw that one too. I was getting.
Uh, for saltwater, pineapple, fresh pineapple, is to die for after a dive. But I thought you could eat absolutely anything when you go diving, or at least that's my philosophy.
That
Oh,
is a
someone
great
else was
question.
asking if I'm writing another book. I am. I have a contract for a second book. I'm having a little bit of distraction these days. I'm finding it
Wait,
really hard to focus on anything, frankly.
right?
Um,
I was gonna be like, wait, what?
all like most of you out there, all my work just in the course of about 2 days was canceled, disappeared. Every trip, every expedition, every project gone. Right. So except I do have a contract for a second book, and I'm working on another kids book as well. But I'm just having trouble focusing, so I'm trying to get over that and create more of a schedule regimen for myself that I get up and get to work at it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I
Yeah.
feel you on that one.
Mhm.
I'm trying the same thing. Kind of actually going over like routines and schedules too,
Mhm.
because that's something that I was actually really curious about while I was reading through. I think my favorite part, in all honesty, was your Antarctica expedition,
Okay.
because many people might not ever be able to do that. So being able
Mhm.
to hear about that and working with National Geographic,
Yeah.
you were talking about in the book that you didn't know how much time you had. Like you had a certain amount of time to complete what you needed to complete. So
Mm.
if you could, for the other people watching, like how much time is one typically given for a National Geographic expedition, if they are given anything?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it really varies. I mean, back in the days when we did that, I mean, they were, able to generously fund a large expedition. And these days, it's totally different. On the one hand, it's good and bad, I should say. So it's good in the sense that anyone now can come up with an idea and just go and apply. So anyone listening right now that has a great idea for an expedition can just get on the National Geographic website and apply for funding. Now they'll support all of the logistics for a potential project in exchange for first right of publication, meaning that you have to go on like social media publication silence for 1 year, and they have a chance to publish your story, what you've gathered, whatever. They'll pay you for the pictures of yours if they use them. If they don't, there's no pay. There's no way to get a salary that way. But after 1 year, if they haven't published, they release the rights, and you can do whatever you want with your pictures, your story, or whatever else. So on the one hand, it's changed. Like it used to be, there are very few gatekeepers that you had to get to and pitch in order to win support for a project. Now, there are many more outlets available to anybody. You don't have to have any background at all, just an idea. So that's a good thing. Project support, though, has changed quite a bit, like financially. To get 1/10 of what we used to get today is almost a victory. And it's also very much more difficult to get a project where you can actually get your salary covered, if you believe it or not.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of work on spec. I do a lot of work where I'm not actually being paid day to day on the project, but I do own the creative assets of the project. I just have to find another way to utilize those, whether it's writing my memoir and putting some of those pictures in the book, or doing an independent film or a magazine article for an outlet that pays. It's challenging. So a lot has changed in that space. There are less gatekeepers for journalism and filmmaking, but you got to be really creative and tenacious in order to make a living in this underwater world these days.
Yeah, most definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that also being in Antarctica, because you were talking also about, and this kind of goes with the expedition too, of how you had to take all your waste and like being able to have to keep it. Do you think that Antarctica has made you more environmentally conscious because of it?
Oh, definitely. In fact, all of the projects that I've worked on have made me more environmentally conscious. That's really the sum of all of my experiences. Is I've seen climate change in the geology of the underwater caves of the Bahamas and in the B-15 iceberg in Antarctica. And yeah, I've had to protect Antarctica by ensuring that we brought back every bit of food waste, human waste, and everything from the southern continent. Even when I go to the Arctic still, we have to bring back every bit of shit, plain as day, and food waste that we create up there, so we don't despoil the environment. And I've become very resource conscious as I've traveled to these faraway places. When you're in the middle of the Sahara Desert with an Amazigh Bedouin with a limited food supply and very scarce water resources, then you become a molecule miser for every drop of water that you use, and you don't waste a bit of food. And you do carry that back to your life. You live smaller and simpler and more holistically.
Yeah, and you were also talking as an advocate for freshwater conservation too, because we hear so much about ocean conservation, right? But we hear very little about freshwater conservation. So what do you think is the most important thing we need to do for the freshwater ecosystem?
Well, it's funny because I'm just writing the opening for Scuba Diving Magazine's conservation issue that's going to come out in June, and it's just about this exactly. And I like to tell people that the ocean begins beneath your feet, wherever you live in the world. So, rain falls on the ground, it soaks into the earth, it travels from higher places to lower places, but it eventually feeds the groundwater reserves, or it runs off across the landscape. And when I'm swimming in a cave, I am swimming in your groundwater at the beginning of the pipe. And I get to see that everything that happens on the surface of the land soaks into the ground and is returned to us to drink. Because that water that I'm swimming in the cave, comes out of the cave and it dumps into a spring, and that spring feeds a creek that feeds a river. That river feeds the estuary. That estuary feeds the Gulf of Mexico, and then it gets caught up in the current that comes around the bottom of Florida and ends up off in the Gulf Stream. So things that happen inland in the middle of North America do influence the oceans. And the oceans are the lungs of our planet. And if we can't take care of those, we're all going to suffocate. So I think it's that interconnectedness that I would like everybody to think about, that we all understand interconnectedness now because of this coronavirus.
Yes.
Nobody can doubt that things that happen in any far corner of the planet can affect us. And the same is true of water, that thin thread of sustenance that links all of us on this earth together. And if we don't keep that water clean, and if we don't deliver good, fresh, clean drinking water reserves to everybody on the planet, then we're going to live in a world of conflict, and we're going to live in a world of challenge for the ocean landscapes as well.
Yeah, no, that's really beautifully said of the idea that, yeah, we have to think about this interconnectedness. And I think that this in some ways, yes, obviously this is a very terrible pandemic, but in a lot of other ways it's really heightened how we need to really preserve our natural world and think about that we all play a part in this world in so many ways. So
yeah. I see that Kim wrote a really great follow-on question, which is like, travel. Do I struggle with the carbon footprint of flying? I absolutely struggle with that. I live in a small town where I can park the car and do everything on foot and on my bicycle here. So we don't use the car at all in town. Like, I walk for groceries in the winter. I might snowshoe or ski for groceries, or bicycle for groceries in the summertime. But we don't use the car unless there's something that's absolutely too heavy to carry, which is not very often. But I do get on an airplane a lot for expeditions and projects. And the way that I guess, justified that in my mind is, when possible, I've tried to carbon offset expeditions. So buy carbon offsets, or create carbon offsets within the outreach program of the expedition itself. That's really why I started the We Are Water project. So years ago, I did a documentary called We Are Water. And when it came time to tour the documentary, my husband and I decided to do it on bicycle.
I remember
So so we rode our bicycles 4,600 miles from Vancouver, Canada, all the way to St. John's, Newfoundland, and toured the movie that way. And so I continued in the spirit of that. When I travel anywhere on a project, I try and make sure that I'm doing We Are Water outreach, that I'm visiting schools and kids, or whoever will listen to the message. And I show them some exciting stuff about cave diving, and then carry that We Are Water message. And so I use, that as part of my carbon offset. But I do struggle with that. And I think, the time is going to come when I'm, going to have to, really, really think more about that travel and the impact it has on the planet, and try as much as possible to use other ways like this to reach people with a message and share a message.
Right. And kind of going off of someone that asked a really great question that kind of goes back to that freshwater resource, was, what's your favorite cave system and why? Or what systems are you looking forward to planning on diving in the future too? So
it's so hard for me to pick favorites, whether it's a favorite animal, a favorite dive site, or a favorite cave, because they're all different, and I just love being in the water. So it's hard for me to pick a bad one. But in terms of really beautiful cave systems, both Bermuda and Abaco in the Bahamas have some of the prettiest ones. Sorry, I need a drink.
No, you're good.
Yeah. In terms of general diving, the west coast of British Columbia, stunningly beautiful. But yeah, it's so hard to pick a favorite, and I don't really have a bucket list. I just have a list of other places I still want to go.
What are some of those places? Because you've traveled so many places around the world. So what are some of those places to go?
Galapagos. Haven't been to Galapagos yet. Cocoa Islands. I haven't been to Cocos. Yeah, there's so many. I was supposed to be in the next couple of months. I had a project in the Philippines. I had a project in Australia. I don't think either of those are going to happen. Supposed to be in the Arctic in May. We canceled that because so far there's no coronavirus in Nunavut, Canada, and I don't want to bring it up there. So we're not doing that project either. So I hope I get to go back to some of these places again. I hope the airlines survive. We'll see. I mean, who knows at this point, eh?
Yeah, I know. We'll see what kind of occurs with everything. Let's see, I'm trying to
Yeah.
figure out.
I think local diving is going to have a real upsurge, I hope,
I think
anyway. I
so
mean,
too.
we all have to keep that in mind, that the local dive shops that fill our tanks offer the service for our regulators and have training facilities. Those local dive shops are going to be really important to support it, so we can continue to get compressed air, because that's like not the profit center of the dive shop. That's
Right.
where they spend all their money into a big black hole. Um, and so I hope maybe people will think a little bit more about buying something from the local dive shop, either giving them a chance to match a price online, or being willing to pay just a little bit more to make sure that those guys are around for fills. And then I think there'll be a new appreciation for local diving too,
Yeah.
because it's going to be, we're all going to be in financial, you know, issues for a while. And, even if the airlines are running, jumping on a plane to go on a vacation just might not be a resource that you have for a while. So I hope people don't hang up their fins completely, but I hope they maybe have a new connection with local diving too.
Yeah, I know that I got to thankfully do my drift diving certification actually in the Niagara River near Niagara Falls,
Mm,
and that was a interesting one in general, just because that's
yeah.
when I lived in Rochester, that's where it was easy to do that, and you have all the Great Lakes there, so I
There's
think
actually a lot of artifacts too
there are.
in the Niagara River or Chippewa Creek, some of the other like tributaries that run into the river. Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, I think that we all, love and think about the ocean for scuba diving, but there's some
Mhm.
great stuff in those freshwater water environments,
Mhm.
which again, you obviously take a lot of time when you
Yeah.
went to the springs and whatnot too. And
Yeah. Well, I grew up in the Great Lakes, so I learned to
yeah,
dive in Tobermory, Canada, and now I live sort of near Ottawa, so I can. There's local diving,
yeah.
but I can get down to the St. Lawrence or the Great Lakes, or I also have a cave system nearby too, so I'm pretty
There
lucky.
you go. You got it all.
I
You
got
got
it
it
all.
all.
Yeah. It's not warm, but I got it all.
Right, right. It's not warm, but you got it all.
Yeah.
Let me just make sure I have a lot of other questions to ask, but I want to make
Mhm.
sure that no other ladies have some other things that they wanted to. And again, I don't know if you're a part of Girls at Scuba, but is there a way that if we don't have these questions all answered, because
Yeah, just reach out. I am a member. Yeah.
perfect, perfect, we'll just do it that
Yeah.
way too.
Mhm.
Well, one woman that's just a one liner is from a 54-year-old. What
Yeah.
is your exercise regimen to stay fit for diving?
Oh, great. I can't go to the gym. I'm like one of these people that can't be indoors. I'm so like, well, here I am in isolation, right? But when it comes to exercise, I have to be outdoors. Like in the gym, I don't have the attention span, or I just get bored. I mean, I
Yeah.
have an exercise bike in the house right now just for necessity, but mostly I'm walking, I'm hiking, I'm cycling a lot. That's my second love outside of diving. And when it's warm, I'm swimming. I have a river right out back. I actually live in an old 200-year-old mill that was turned into little condos. And so right out back, I'm on a waterfall, and just above the waterfall, I can jump in and swim against the flow, and it's great exercise. It's a little cold right now, but a few more weeks, or I don't know, just out of desperation, I might be in there pretty soon.
You could just put on, a wetsuit or whatnot. You'll be good.
Yeah, yeah. Right now, the ice is still coming over the dam, so
Maybe not right now, but
yeah. But yeah, so I just do outdoor activities and don't really have a formal regimen. And I think just by the very fact that I'm like lifting the gear all the time, that's weight training.
yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, um, so I guess another big question is that I had that I was really impacted by too was
yeah.
um, as a woman diver, explorer, and so much more, also as just being you, Jill, what do you think it will take to have more equality and given more respect from men? Because I was really when I
Yeah.
was reading the Antarctica section where it was like the men were getting drunk and then would start to like go
Mm,
get on to the women and whatever else. I was just
yeah.
thinking about that mission and how
Hmm.
as you've been in this field for such a long time, what has changed? Maybe where do you think we're
Yeah.
getting to, or what do we need to change in certain?
Yeah, a few years back, I wrote a feature called Sexism Alive and Well in the Diving Industry. And I was so proud of Diver Magazine for turning that into a cover feature. It's turned out to be the most read article in their magazine's history. Yeah. So it was meant to be like not a man bashing article at all. It was meant to be, informational for men. Like, here's how you might be unintentionally doing sexist things. And it was meant to be affirmational for women. It was meant to be like, hey, it's happened to me and I know it's happening to you as well. When I started diving, it was worse. Worse in both overt and unintentional ways. Like, there was no women's dive gear, and I remember running around the dive shows trying to show different people I knew in manufacturing the different proportions of women. Like, I literally ran around a dive show and I grabbed people from the different manufacturers and I said, look, come with me. Let's take a measuring tape here. The distance from a woman's neck to her waistline is really short. She has a short torso. A man's is really big. A man has a giant neck that's closer to his head ratio. A woman has a smaller neck to head ratio. And so pulling a neoprene, at the time, all we had were neoprene dry suit seals, but pulling a neoprene dry suit seal over her head will almost rip the nose off her face. And then it'll be too big on her neck. And then she'll still rip her hair out getting it off. So I remember running around shows just saying, look at this empirical evidence that we are different. We need different gear. We're still fighting that to a degree. Like, at the time we used to say, women's gear is not just built on the SAP principle, small and pink, right? It should be built to proportions and with the expectation that we can and will do every bit of the same kind of diving that any male will do. So it shouldn't be like cute with less features. It should be, fit us and fully functional. So there were gear issues, those physical issues, but there were also, attitudinal stuff that I still get frustrated with today, but it's getting better. It's getting better. Like, I can't wait for the day when we won't need a Women Divers Hall of Fame, where, like, I'm sorry that we needed to do that. but there were just no women that were being, recognized for their contributions to the industry. And I'm so proud of what we've done in 20 years in creating hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of training scholarships and grants for women all over the world. And everybody here should be applying for those, please.
Yeah, that's actually a question that I kind of had too about that was, what what does it take to be inducted into the Women Divers Hall of Fame in certain ways, or what did it,
yeah, it's just a nomination program, so anybody can sorry, I'm just typing in.
No, you're fine.
The website. Yeah. There we go. Yeah, so anybody can nominate anybody for the Women Divers Hall of Fame. But also we have a scholarship and training grant program. So we have dozens and dozens and dozens of grants for research, grants for, you want to take a class in dive emergency medicine. If you just want a general training grant to do something you've always wanted to do. So there's tons of those there that are, I would say, under applied for. Like, a lot of people go, oh yeah, there must be great people applying for this. Yeah, but there's not as many as you might think. So definitely apply for those. And then if you know of a woman that has had a lifetime contribution, like, being a member of the Women Divers Hall of Fame is not just about diving skill, it's about contributions to the industry, volunteerism, service, firsts. And every year the new class tries to reflect a bunch of different aspects of diving. So there might be someone who may not have had as much time in the water, but something that they've done for conservation is so critically important that they were worthy of that nomination. And if you do nominate someone for the Women Divers Hall of Fame, be aware that it takes years. Keep applying. So the people that I've nominated have taken many, many, many years to rise to the top, and then be selected by the committee. So yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you kind of explaining that, because I think that we need to almost be to the level of, you know, the great Her Deepness, Dr. Sylvia Earle, to like be inducted into this Women Divers Hall of Fame. But it could be like my local dive shop here in St. Pete, who this woman, she just started her dive shop, but she's all about, like you were saying with the gear, making sure that she sells gear that is strictly for women, so that she's tested all of her gear herself. And granted, maybe that's not to what one would think, but she's exemplifying what it should be, what we should be looking at for it, for the industry. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, wouldn't it be great if there were women employees in all dive shops?
Yes.
Seriously. Yeah, I think a lot more women would be diving if they had, someone who would help them through that whole initial process of getting started and getting fitted and everything else.
Yeah, almost like a mentorship program in certain ways too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we have that at the Women Diving Hall of Fame too. So women who are seeking mentors in a particular area of interest, marine biology, engineering, medicine, art, photography, whatever, we try and connect people with others who can help them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that about kind of the Women Divers Hall of Fame. I think that's important that we all know that is in place.
Never be afraid to reach out to anyone, really. Like, if you ever have a question for me, just drop me a message. It's always better if you use my website and get to my email address rather than like a private message on a social media, because I could miss that. I won't miss an email. But just reach out to people, reach out to Sylvia Earle or someone else if you have a specific question or want some help or want an introduction. That's the wonderful thing about the internet today, is that we can share these experiences, and we're all just divers, right?
I mean, that's how we got to know each other, was me just being like, you know what, I'm going to reach out to Jill, see how it goes. And look, here we are. Like, it's just crazy how that happens. And actually, Laura Thorne, who's kind of helping with this co-host, she just posted and said that she worked in a dive shop and she wasn't allowed to sell dive equipment, just wakeboards. Men made the commission.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. That's
what's interesting is DEMA did a study a few years ago, and they discovered that the vast majority of dive equipment purchasing decisions are made by women. So women for themselves, but also women for their husbands too. Like, when it comes down to it, he said, "Can I do this?" Or, "What do you think?" And the woman is ultimately making the buying decision. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy. Kind of to switch completely like 360, because I still had more questions about your Antarctica trip, because again, I was just like enthralled with it. Was what was it like making history in terms of capturing DNA samples from those southern resident type D orcas that we now know as type D? Like, I would have been like probably crying tears of joy, just like that we figured that out.
It was really interesting that the scientist that was responsible for that, Carlos Olivier from Chile, he had been on an Antarctic boat for a whole season another time, and had actually been stuck in the ice, and the boat was being crushed, and he was rescued off that boat. So when he came with us on our boat, which was quite a small research vessel, he was terrified, absolutely terrified. On a big ship that had been frozen in and almost crushed, and here we were, like, even just a couple days outside of New Zealand, and we were experiencing 60-foot seas and like really dangerous stuff. But Carlos was like driven, like, I gotta get this sample, because at the time, the way we would sample DNA from a killer whale is to use a small biopsy dart that would take a little piece of flesh about the size of a pencil lead. I mean, today you can just fly a drone over a blowhole and collect snot, right?
Called Snotbots. I actually kickstarted that guy.
Oh, that's great.
Awesome. Yeah.
But we had to fire a gun that would shoot a dart and just pull a small sample. And Carlos was just this beautiful, empathetic soul who loves orcas. And we're driving around in a 118-foot boat, and it's like, oh, there's some orcas. Well, you all know how hard it is to get close to anything when you see it, right? And so in huge seas, we'd see some orcas and try and get to them and maneuver the boat so Carlos could take a shot. And then he'd be like, oh, no, it's a mother. it's a mother and calf. I'm not going to do that. I know it's only the size of a pencil lead, but what if it scares her? I can't do that. You know, we got to wait till we have the right male, right? Or separate male away from a family, because we don't want to separate a family. And so this literally, the search for the biopsy went on for like a month and a half until he got the shot and pulled the DNA. And we didn't even learn till later that it was confirmed. But yeah, pretty exciting. New subspecies of killer whale.
That is amazing. That's the sweetest thing that he's like, no, I can't do that to the moms and the calves. Like that's just traumatizing for them.
Yeah,
Oh
and
my
we
God,
could look at these killer whales and know that they were different. Like we knew that we had the right
yeah,
kind,
yeah,
right? So imagine to have that kind of discipline, to have spent your entire life specializing for one result, but then to have the maturity and discipline to go, "Oop, nope, nope, not that one." You know, I'll get it.
yeah. Well, and that's why I was asking you about how long it took
Mm.
for the Nat Geo
Mhm.
expeditions, because of the fact that we might see, like, let's just say Shark Week. You know, we watched like
Yeah,
one film of Shark, or we watched a clip that's 30 minutes of Shark Week, but we don't
yeah.
realize how long it actually takes for them to get that shot of like that great white breaching out of,
Oh,
South
yeah.
Africa.
I mean, we'll make a shot list and then go to the Arctic, you know, oh, we want to shoot
Yep.
polar bears, narwhals, belugas, whatever, and make this huge shot list. And then it won't happen. You know, you can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, going north and camping week after week after week on the ice and then not get the animal that you want. Or you might just get it all on the last day. And and plus you've planned for the expedition for sometimes years. Like
Yeah.
with everything of mine that's gone away right now, some of these were projects that I've had on the calendar for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Like right now, I'm in discussions with National Geographic for a project in 2022. So uh, that's how long ahead you have to
Yeah.
get things rolling. And some of that is in order to get the funding, some of it is in order to get the logistical support in place, especially in the polar regions. Like
Yeah.
it's actually easier to go to Antarctica these days because there's tourist vessels that go down there. But to the Arctic, you have to be at least a year in advance because a lot of your logistical stuff will need to go on a boat that only goes once a year to the north. And so you might have to get that stuff on the boat a year and a half before you need it. So the compressor is there when you arrive. And the tanks are there when you arrive, or you're going to need lead weight. Well, you better get it on a boat 18 months in advance.
Yeah.
Mm,
Serious planning, like
yeah,
to the
yeah.
extreme. A great question that we have too is from Barbara. She said, I'm 48. I went to
Mhm.
business school and worked in corporate America. If I could do it all over again, I would have studied marine biology. How can I
Mhm.
transition from wreck diver to scientific diver without having a science background?
Well, my university background is in fine arts. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Visual Communications design, and yet I'm often writing scientific proposals. I'm writing the script for documentary films that are science oriented. I'm giving commentary, scientific commentary in front of a camera. Um, and so, in that regard, I'm self taught, and the internet is fantastic for that because the world's scientific knowledge is now published on great academic websites
Yeah.
for us to access. And at this time in seclusion, there's opportunities to take online training. There's quite a few
Yes.
places that are doing free online trainings in the hopes that they'll lure you in for more courses later. But I would say just do it. You can take a scientific diving specialty program in a
Hmm.
lot of places. A lot of universities and colleges that have diving programs offer scientific diving programs. And frankly, science today relies heavily on citizen scientists.
Yes.
So we used to have the luxury of time, right? Where a scientist has a very long study, research, hypothesis, writing and publication schedule. But a lot of the things that are affecting our oceans these days are happening too fast for our traditional scientific calendar. And so fast science and citizen science is critical. That person that has specialized in one aspect of climate change for their entire scientific career has not had time to become a diver.
Right.
And our eyes and our hands in the wilderness that can bring back data for them, that can do survey work for them, that can do photography, or just be the observer underwater. So they need a whole army of us to help them. So my advice is, learn things on the internet, take a scientific diving class, and then volunteer. Because every opportunity that I had in life to build this career that I have today happened because I volunteered for an expedition, got to know someone, and made connections.
It's so true. It's so
All
true.
without a science degree.
Right. Yeah. Right. Oh, without a science degree. Yeah, I think that, Barbara, to your point, as a environmental studies major, I'm doing something different that's kind of in the field, but not at the same way too. And I think it's honestly, and maybe Jill will say the same thing, it's about your connections. It's about hustling. And it's about asking people for like, how do I do that? And asking them, can you help me get there? Or, like you said, Jill, volunteering. It's in using citizen science. I mean, there's so many things out there that, you know, you can do to volunteer with in whatever way, shape, or form. I know I volunteer at the Florida Aquarium in Tampa, and it's been cool to be able to hang out at and teach people about cow nose stingrays. Like I never knew I was going to do that because living in Rochester, New York, that was not a possibility for me. But you move and you see what you can do, whether it be taking those courses online or whatever else. So I agree.
Yeah, that's great. And great question, Barbara. Thanks for that.
Yeah, that was an awesome question.
Mm-hmm.
One of the big things that I also was kind of going with, changing or transitioning is we actually read the book Deep by James Nestor, and he wrote about freediving. So it's funny that you were talking about freediving too.
Yeah.
And I happened to notice in both your book and his book, where you both are kind of, he was more exploring freediving, but then you obviously are the expert in the field. That it seems like the heads that are in their field are never seeming to go after the record aspect of things. You talked about how like a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
So why do you think that experts aren't as narrow-minded about record setting as, I guess, not the general public, but like, I don't know. Yeah.
For me, I'm very uncomfortable with diving records because of risk. And I don't see a purpose in it. So like a very, very dear friend of mine, Jim Bowden, was with Shek Exley when Shek was trying to reach 1,000 feet deep in a cave. Shek was one of the pioneers in cave diving safety, but Shek lost his life going for that record. Right. Jim was in the water on the same day as he was, also going for the record, basically, but on an opposite side of this sink. Like they were never intended to be able to help each other on this. But Shek didn't make it, and Jim did. And so I often talk to Jim about his dangerous mistress, the lure at the bottom of that cave that just kept trying to pull him downward. And for him, it seemed to have a personal purpose. Testing the limits of his own capability and human physiology and answering the questions of what's in that deep cave down there. But for the most part, a lot of those like people that go for deep scuba records where they just swim down a line and grab a tag and come back, I don't understand it because a lot of those people do die. And a lot of people feel compelled to try and recover their body and take risks that have killed rescuers and recovery divers. It's different for me when it's free diving because that is answering a scientific question for me. What are the limits of human physiology? And having taken free diving classes now, I understand that the safety protocols around those kinds of dives are incredible, and so I get it in free diving. I don't get it in scuba. I every dive that I do has to be sort of worth it for some reason to take that risk, whether it's, answering a question or bringing back images or whatever else. It has to be worth it. So when an expedition comes to me and says, "Oh, we want to film you, or we want you to film this deep shipwreck, blah, 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 blah," it has to be worth it. There has to be a reason,
Yeah.
for me. And I don't find that in those deep records. Yeah.
That's that's an interesting. Yeah, I like that idea of that purpose. I think that a lot of people say that too, if they need to have a
Mhm.
purpose of why they're doing what they're doing, and
Mhm.
if it's like you said, if it's worth the risk or not.
Yeah,
So
I mean, what would my husband say if I did something unnecessarily, right? Like just to
right.
go to the bottom of a cold lake and grab a tag to be deeper than somebody else. It's like, you know, that'd be such a
Yeah.
waste. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if, yeah, I think that also, yeah, being in that record book, okay, you were in that record book, but at what cost
Yeah.
are you now in that
Mhm.
record book? Yeah.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
interesting you say that. One woman, Kim, said, not a question, but just wanted to say that my friend Diane Morel, a paraplegic
Oh,
diver, speaks very highly of swimming, of diving with you, excuse me, even if it was in a pool. She is
oh.
quite a cave diver now.
I love Diane. She is so remarkable with what she's accomplished. She's recently done her side mount diving program, and um, her colleague instructor Hubert Christian and I are planning to finish her full cave with her this winter if the travels are allowed and we can all get together. But that's our goal. She's an extraordinarily tough, great diver. Despite paraplegia, she has done such remarkable things and inspired a lot of other people to go beyond the things that might slow them down a little bit and show them that anything is possible. She's great.
That's where pushing your limits are okay when you,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. When it can inspire others.
Yeah, I wrote
Great.
an article about Diane for a magazine, and she taught me, like, I when I wrote the article, I said, Diane, I need you to proofread this for me, please. Tell me if I've said something stupid or used incorrect terminology or whatever. And at one point, I had used the word disabled diver, and she said,
Mm,
no, don't, no, please don't use that. Say a diver with disabilities. I'm a diver first. I have some
mhm.
challenges, but I'm not a disabled diver. I'm a diver with disabilities. And I thought, okay, I will carry that forever when I think about that. Yeah,
I
yeah,
love that. I love that. Thinking about kind of the terminology and the way you think about things. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. What that conveys.
Yeah. So kind of on a lighter note too, not that that wasn't a lighter note because I was
Yeah,
very happy too. I'm
yeah.
just reading through some of the questions some people have as well was with so many opportunities that you are given, how do
Yeah.
you choose or prioritize whether to spend your time admiring reefs in the tropics, exploring untraversed cave systems, campaigning around environmental concerns, or inspiring a new generation with your tales of adventure?
I say yes to everything. I actually have a hard time saying no, unless it's like not a good fit, right? But it's how should I put this? I'm still, despite the appearance of success, I still have to find the next paycheck all the time. So it's tough, right? And it becomes a balance. Like I do a lot of spec work, a lot of volunteer work, and then I hope that in the big picture of things all comes together and pays off. But um, and I do keep myself extraordinarily busy. But oftentimes things do come down in the end to, okay, oh my God, how are we going to put food on the table? And I'm going to have to pick one of those things. Like I've had, we'll make independent films or make independent published books or whatever, and then it'll be like, well, maybe I need to go work for someone on a movie to get a bigger paycheck.
Right.
For a bit, as I might not like that as much, but is necessary.
Well, you just
Yeah,
had a documentary that came out, didn't you? It was called
yeah.
Into, what was
Uh,
it?
Under
Into
Thin Ice.
Under Thin Ice.
Under
That's
Thin
right.
Ice.
It's like
Yeah.
I was
Mm.
combining Into the Planet with Under and Ice, the same thing
Yeah.
together. Didn't work very well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was supposed to be premiered at the Environmental Film Festival at the nation's capital, I believe.
It was, yeah. And when that got canceled, we managed to convince them to do an online festival, and which just ended. But
Dang it.
I'm trying to find another way that at least American viewers will be able to stream it for free. So I'm trying to work with the producers to find another way to release that. If you're in Canada, though, you can still stream it on CBC Gem for free. But the one that we had streaming for free until April 1st was the full 90-minute
Oh,
documentary.
nice.
Yeah,
Dang it, I just missed it then.
yeah.
I,
I'm really, really proud of that film. I think it's, one of the most important things that I've ever done, talking, about climate change,
mhm.
giving people the right information, the honest information, but still making it a beautiful, hopeful film.
Yeah.
And then I also had some of the most amazing diving experiences of my life, and some that I'll never do again. I swam and photographed from the water polar bears, and it was amazing, but it was so, so dangerous. I don't know if I'll do that again.
Yeah.
But I had the chance to be in the water with polar bears, with walruses, belugas, narwhals, bowhead whales, you name it. It was incredible, and hard work. I mean, we camped on the sea ice up in Lancaster Sound. We went through a lot of hardship to get it.
Yeah. I don't know which one I'd be more terrified of, a bull walrus or a polar bear. I'm not sure. I
Well,
mean,
my colleague Mario actually told me the walruses are more dangerous. He's
I
done
think
this a
they were.
lot. And it's funny because I didn't sense the evil nature of the walruses. Like, to me, it just seemed like, they were like a little family unit always swimming around. Now they were like a pack of dogs in a sense, like they're just swirling around on top of each other, and they're fierce, and they'll turn to the nearest piece of ice and bash their tusks against it to show you what they do with your head. But the polar bear is just like nose on the water, beelining for you, full speed to eat you. So it's scary.
Yeah. Someone said that potentially Under Thin Ice seems to be on YouTube,
I
but
see that. Wow,
we'll
I'll
have
have to
to
check
look
that
that.
out.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. I'm gonna put in, our app is called Discover the Arctic. So
Cool.
and it's free on Android and Mac.
Perfect.
So we created an app called Discover the Arctic that has the journey. It has all kinds of information about climate change and about different marine mammals, and it's full of like quizzes and games and stuff for kids, but like adults will find it entertaining and educational as well. But yeah, if you want to get your kid lost in some educational material for a while, just download it. It's free, and they'll spend hours on it.
Perfect. That's probably what some kids need after being homeschooled all the time, and
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
need a
Well,
distraction
yeah.
too.
Well, this will homeschool them. Yeah, yeah. No, it's really it's good educational material, but it's fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I guess the as we're starting to wrap up things,
Mm.
and again, people can still post in the comments for a little bit, but one that I really liked too was, when did you realize that this path was the right one for you? What point did you
Oh,
stop to think,
mm.
wow, I'm making an impact?
So I wanted to dive from the time I was a little kid, but growing up in Canada, my parents knew nothing about diving. They didn't think that people actually did dive in Canada. So I was sort of, it was the one thing I was kind of discouraged from doing as a youngster. And it was just because they didn't know about it.
Yeah.
So I didn't start to dive till I was late in university. And I knew from the first time in the pool that this was the thing, right? This was the thing for me, the thing that I could be really good at. And I ended up working in advertising for a few years before I sold my business, sold everything I owned, and moved to the tropics and said, come hell or high water, literally, I'm going to find a way to make an underwater career. And
Yeah.
so I did know it, even before that first class. But in terms of thinking, wow, I'm making an impact.
Or just made it. I made it. Even that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so funny. Women are really good at imposter syndrome.
They
So we never
so are.
really we never really feel like we've we've made it, right? So um I I recognize that like people do contact me and say, "Oh, well, you made a difference in my life," or whatever, and then that's incredibly moving for me. And maybe that's my most important purpose is I say to people, I want to be the woman that I wish I'd met when I was 10, but I want to always be open and accessible to other people to encourage them to do whatever the heck they want to do. But if I can give them some guidance or information, then great.
Yeah.
So I think it's those moments. It's when I get a letter from a kid.
Yeah.
That's when I feel like, wow, okay, yeah, this is important. I need to keep doing this. I was meant to do this. Yeah,
I love that.
it's the little stuff.
It is the little stuff. It is
Yeah,
the little stuff.
yeah.
See. So some people, because I feel like this is like, even though I want to keep asking questions, this is like the perfect way to almost end it. But
Okay.
I see some people are saying like, huge thank you, Jill, for your book.
Mhm.
I veered between hell no and maybe.
Yeah.
And one thing that someone else asked was, I have seen Under Thin Ice, and my thing
Mhm.
with me movies is that it is possibly, what, hold on, let's see.
Oh, it might encourage people to want to encounter wild
Yeah,
animals.
okay. Not
Yeah.
knowing the danger, so being able,
Mhm.
so kind
Mhm.
of the idea that people have
Yeah.
had with like Ocean Ramsey with
Mhm.
swimming with great whites,
Mhm.
when maybe
Mhm.
that's not the greatest idea.
Well, and I've had that dilemma my entire life. Like I worried in the 90s when we started making TV programs about the Riviera Maya. It wasn't called the Riviera Maya in the 90s. It was a 2-lane road through the bush, and we hiked with machetes to discover new caves. And maybe that television coverage actually it did. Everybody's television coverage of that beautiful area turned that into a tourist mecca that brought with it pollution. You know, so anytime we bring media to the underwater world, there are good effects and bad effects.
Mhm.
It's a little bit like the Shamu effect, where, is a killer whale in an aquarium a good thing or a bad thing? I mean,
Right.
obviously it's bad for the killer whale, right? Um, but if the killer whale is never going to be able to survive in the wild, maybe there's some saving grace. But the one thing that's for sure is that hundreds of thousands of people will be experiencing that animal and learn something from that and hopefully want to protect it. Now, I'm not a fan of, don't get me
Yeah,
wrong, I don't like marine mammals in
I
captivity
don't
at
either.
all.
Yeah.
But I do think that, some of those visualizations, like us filming, narwhals or belugas or whatever, I hope that will help people to understand climate change better and want to
Yeah.
protect it. So it's for a positive reason. And I only work on those kinds of programs that are for a positive reason. I won't do anything that's going to be exploitative to cultures, people, or the wildlife.
Yeah.
So there has to be a good end to it for me. But I also know that if you want to go swim with a beluga or a narwhal, good luck. Good luck. It is so freaking hard and so expensive, even just to get yourself in close proximity. If you see a tusk pop out of the water, man, do a happy dance. You'll be one of the few people in the world that'll ever get to see it. It's hard.
I bet. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a remote area. They're mischievous
Yeah.
in and of itself. There's
And
ice.
they're
I mean, there's
rare.
a whole, yeah, and they're rare.
They're rare. Yeah, they're more rare all the time.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. Great question though. Thanks for that.
that
There's
is,
always a double-edged sword, eh?
there is, it's true. It's true. There always is a double-edged sword, and I think that that's something that we as divers do
Mhm.
actually really well in, is thinking about what are the risks and what are the benefits,
Yeah.
and asking
Well,
those questions.
yeah, I mean, we travel, we have a carbon impact, we jump into the water, and, we've learned that we've taken, gallons of sunscreen into the water and despoiled the environment. But we could stay home and pollute the ocean as well. We're good at that with, with plastics. But at the same time, this core of divers, especially women divers, are really good at sharing the positive stuff
Yes.
and sharing the conservation messages and the personal growth that we have experienced experience, from being neutrally buoyant in paradise. I mean, we mermaids have an opportunity to spread a lot of love and education and conservation out there, and that's where those negative impacts get mitigated. So, I know I'm speaking to the choir, because this is a
Girls with
fantastic
Scuba.
open
Yeah.
community that I love seeing people share, hopes, dreams, bad experiences, and nobody's getting beaten, battered, and abused. Like, it's just this honest, open, beautiful community.
Oh,
And
well,
so I'm so happy to speak with you today.
we so appreciate that,
Oh,
because this
you're
is,
doing a great thing.
well, kudos to Sarah Richard, who is the founder of Girls at Scuba. I mean,
Mhm.
she was living in Hong Kong and basically was on different boats as a dive
Mhm.
master, and realized just the sexism she experienced, and she just wanted to find scuba buddies that are also women to dove together with her. And lo and behold, 2 or 3 years later, there's
Here
almost
we are.
45,000 members that are
It's
girls all
fantastic.
over the world, and it's amazing. So
Yeah,
we so appreciate you joining in with us and talking about
thanks.
things. And yeah, if you have, we're so excited for your next book. We'll be right in line for it.
Thanks.
We're excited, but we hope that
Awesome.
you'll, yeah, if anybody has other questions or whatnot, feel free to bring them in. But it looks
Yeah,
like
reach
everybody's,
out, send me a PM.
it looks
Yeah.
like everyone's saying thank
Yeah.
you. And
Cool.
again, thank you so much, Jill. And
Yeah.
we'll be posting this in the Girls That Scuba Book Club. We'll try and put it on the
Great.
main page, and Girls That Tech Dive. So thank
Awesome.
you again. And
Okay. Be well and safe, everyone, too.
yes. All right.
Okay. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye-bye.